Outstanding. Welcome back, everyone. Super glad that we've held our audience, and I'm especially happy to introduce these two awesome individuals. Again, I've made this comment on several different sessions. It's a miracle we were able to make the stars align and get everyone's schedule so we could get you in person, albeit virtually, to get you here. So the title of this session is Master MCCs, industry experts discuss common misuses and best practices. And to have this conversation, we have Rob Johnson from Visa, who is head of Visa Rules Management North America. Welcome, my friend. I appreciate you coming to stay with us, to hang out with us today. And we have my very absolute dearest friend on the planet, Theresa Kananen, partner with Arnell Golden Gregory, famous payments attorney who's been in our space for just a minute. So take it away, my friends. Enjoy your session.
Thank you, Melissa. And I really appreciate how you glossed over any allusion to my age by saying that I've been here for just a minute. Really subtlety there. So as Melissa said, we are going to be talking about MCCs today. And really that's just going to be me grilling Rob. So get ready, Rob. Let's start easy. What is an MCC?
That's the perfect starting question. So essentially, it's a 4-digit numeric that appears in the transaction records, both the authorization and clearing. And the essence of it is to describe the business that the merchant is in, or potentially the type of transaction, or in some instances, the way that the merchant's transactions are conducted, maybe through direct selling and subscriptions and so on. It's a critical piece of data that Visa uses and our clients uses. And it helps us not only just identify the merchant for recognition point of view, but to ascribe anything from a specific level of risk, potentially even pricing aspects, sometimes even dispute aspects, and all the way down to things like reward points. If you have an issuer who is offering triple rewards on dining, then they'll be basing that reward offer on the MCC used by the merchant. But it's a very simple 4-digit MC numeric assigned by the networks.
So you said that this is a critical piece of information to classify merchant type. That means there are a lot of MCCs.
There are, yes. I think the last count, I think it's in the region of just over 2,000. Okay. But a lot of them are dedicated to specific airlines or hotels or car rental companies. So for general use, there's less than 1,000.
Okay. So where is there a list of MCCs for somebody who is trying to figure out which one matches my merchant?
Yeah, great. So very simple. You go to open up your browser, type visa.com. And then in the search bar on the visa.com, if you're in the US, it will direct you to the visa.com US homepage, and type in the word rules. If you type in the word, well, and then click on enter, and that will take you to the Visa Rules Management homepage. If you scroll down the page slightly, you'll see right in the middle, there'll be 2 hypertext links. One is to the most recent Visa Rules publication, the public version of that, and directly below that is the Visa Merchant Data Standards Manual. And that is the manual where we describe and we detail all the MCCs that are available on the Visa network. We also have some other information. We give guidance on how to assign MCCs, but also we talk about merchant location and merchant naming conventions in that document. And it's a totally public document. I did check, we have just republished a new version. We publish the rules every 6 months. As of yesterday, I checked last night at Reagan Airport, had nothing else to do, waiting for my flight. And the Visa Rules book is up to date. It's the October version, but the Merchant Data Standards Manual is still the April version. So we expect the new version to be uploaded within a week. However, between the April version and the October version, there are very, very few changes. But it's always wise to check back and get the most recent version once it's uploaded.
So that is great. When I said, where can you find it? I was expecting an answer like online, but you actually gave us like a click by click path to find it.
I get asked that question a lot.
So you know it, you know the whole route. So
yes.
Slightly related point, I know that the Visa rules get updated April, October. Does the data standards manual also get updated at that same cadence, or did it just happen to need an update around the same time this go around?
Yeah. So it never used to be. We would update it on an ad hoc basis. However, what we have seen in the last few years is an increased demand for bespoke MCCs for, as I say, airlines, hotels, and car rental. A lot of those driven by a couple of acquirers in Japan and some acquirers in the Middle East. But also, there's been some updates to various MCCs. I mean, if I think back 5 years, we didn't have an MCC for electric vehicle charging. So that needed to be done. We've recently recategorized one of our MCCs for adult content. So that needed to be communicated. And every so often Visa does in of itself implement a brand new MCC to address a specific market need. So right now, and for I'd say the last 3 years, every time we publish the new rules, we've also published a new merchant data standards manual. And I really can't see that changing in the future.
Okay. So twice a year cadence for that too.
Twice a year, yeah.
Gotcha. So we're talking about a list of 2,000, probably less than 1,000 MCCs for general commercial use.
Yes.
Where did this list come from? This very lengthy list that's meant to encompass the whole economy.
Yes. Yeah, I've given this some thought because it predates even me, and I've been doing this for 30 years. So from what I understand, the origins, there's a lot of similarity between the MCCs and the SIC codes, the SIC codes, which are often used in, they're kind of used interchangeably with merchant category codes, but they're not quite the same. They're often used in things like export documents and so on to describe businesses or particular types of goods. But where we've got to in the last, I would imagine it's probably the last 20 or 30 years, is that the International Standards Organization who's based in Switzerland, have become the general body that oversees MCC assignment. And they will, if at an industry level we wish to implement a new MCC, as we did recently for the guns and ammunition MCC, then that would be agreed at ISO. They would indicate and flag that numeric that is assigned as a qualifying MCC, and then the networks like ourselves, MasterCard, Amex, may then choose to implement that MCC. And it's important to know that the networks don't always support the same MCC. The last time we checked, which was about a year ago, MasterCard had 9 additional MCCs that Visa does not have. When we looked at them, we didn't see a need to implement them. But there was one, for example, rather than the wine manufacturers, they had a separate one for champagne manufacturers. And we felt that could sit under the regular one. But essentially, any brand new MCCs get agreed with ISO. If it is just an assignment of an MCC for, say, an airline, then my team will actually reach out to their peers at MasterCard, and we will actually agree a numeric that is free and suitable for that merchant. And as a result, then the networks will implement the same MCC without having to ask ISO to agree it for us. And then that means our client, whether they're processing a Visa transaction or a MasterCard transaction, can use the same merchant category code.
So you said that there were 9 or so MCCs that were different that are used by MasterCard, but not Visa. Otherwise, it generally overlaps. People can pick one MCC, yes, and other than those 9, have some confidence that it's going to be usable for both of the super big card brands, Visa, of course, bigger, who have the market share. I love that there's a separate one for champagne. You just have to imagine that some French manufacturer put a lot of pressure on someone who's like, I cannot irritate wine people. This is a specialized business here.
That's absolutely our opinion too. Yeah, MasterCard being originally a French sort of origin, or sorry, European origin, I think that was definitely one of the drivers. The other thing we do as well with them, if an MCC needs, it's not a new MCC, but we notice there's a new use case that should or shouldn't fit under that MCC, we also try and align that with the other networks. So again, we're not suddenly delineating the use of our MCC from the other networks' use of the MCC. So we just added electric vehicle scooters. The Lime scooters that you hire around, yes, say DC, where we just were. In those instances, we had an MCC that covered bicycle rental, but it didn't cover electric scooter rental. So we agree with MasterCard to add that as a use case under that MCC.
Which also explains why you're now updating your MCC tables and data standards manuals twice a year, because
Yes.
so
all
much
these changes.
innovation, you've got to expand. Well, on that note, why is the choice of an MCC important? Because you already mentioned some things like perhaps there could be certain reward points associated with it or affinity programs. But if I am a dry cleaner, why is it important to have an MCC that says dry cleaner as opposed to one that says like gardening tools and supplies? Both brick and mortar. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, sometimes it is less important. And we do have a lot of MCCs that are very similar. And I wouldn't say necessarily open to interpretation, but commonly misused or commonly misapplied when they should be a similar MCC. So, as I say, the key drivers for MCC are, first and foremost, they denote risk. A casino gambling MCC is going to have a very different risk score from a supermarket MCC or a transaction with that MCC. So risk is a key factor. And obviously risk then affects approval rates. But it does drive all these other factors. So recognition, even though it's not common for an issuer to populate the MCC on a statement, I notice now frequently with online banking, you can click on the transaction and it will bring you additional information that isn't standardized on a statement. And that could include the merchant category code. A good example that we've seen in the past of that, and particularly I had as an issuer, where we saw a lot of veterinarians setting up in a sort of common practice, and they would get their own acquiring, their own point of sale device, and it would just be programmed in their name. But the cardholder would remember going to, Johnson Veterinarians, but then they would be debited an entirely different name and would not recognize it. Well, then the MCC would be able to would be the information that says, oh yes, actually, even though it's just a person's name on the transaction record, the MCC will tell you that it's a veterinarian. So that's a big factor. We do have some pricing differences between certain MCCs. When, for example, when an MCC has a very low ticket value, in order to get penetration and acceptance into that particular vertical, Visa and undoubtedly the other networks might offer reduced interchange on those transactions. And a good example of that is the fast food MCC 5814, which has a different interchange rate in the US from the restaurant MCC 5812. So that's why the use of the MCC is important, and also, unfortunately, why sometimes we see abuse of those MCCs for pricing benefit. But those are really the primary reasons behind it. And one other might be the MCC may have particular dispute rights associated with it, or not have particular dispute rights associated with it that the correct MCC may have associated with it. So it's very important that it's accurate, because we don't want to deny or allow a specific dispute right just on the grounds that the MCC was incorrect.
So I've heard then 5 discrete important reasons from you then. So one is the potential for association with affinity programs. Another is that there could be special pricing or interchange associated with it. Another has to do with disputes, yet another with risk, and another is potential like consumer clarity.
Recognition.
Recognition. So the MCC, like you said, is a critical piece of data because it plays all these potential roles for people.
Absolutely. And I can tell you at Visa, that is, if you like, the sniff test that we apply to MCC complaints. We obviously want all data to be accurate, but there are times when an MCC is very similar and is close enough, and it doesn't drive any risk in any of those 5 or 6 factors, that we may still pursue compliance, but we also might reprioritize that case and say it's close enough and we're happy to live with it, particularly if we see pushback from the acquirer or the merchant if we ask them to change it.
I gotcha. Well, so that segs right into our next topic, which is what are best practices for choosing an MCC? And there are some I know where it's going to be, when we spoke about this before, where you said in most cases it's really easy. But let's say like one of my favorite restaurants, it's a bakery with a dine-in restaurant attached, and it's all the same. Like you pay your ticket for the table at the same point of sale, where if you just wanted a dozen muffins, you would go there. So they only have that one POS. I'm guessing they just have the one mid. But I looked it up, and there's a separate MCC for bakeries, of course, and then for
There
restaurants
is.
and eating places. So I imagine this is not one of the super high risk scenarios where like you really need to know if they're running slot machines in the back there. But when you have
Correct.
two that could fit, and you've just got the one mid for the one business, what are some best practices for making sure you get, if not, there could be more than one right answer, but that you try to get the best one, the best.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think the first thing I should explain then is that at the start of the Merchant Data Standards Manual, we actually address the subject of MCC assignment. We provide a whole bunch of guidance on how to assign MCCs, and one aspect of that is if there are two separate businesses or recognizably separate businesses in the same building, that potentially have their own point of sale device as well and potentially have different names, then you should use separate MCCs for each. And the example we give in the Merchant Data Standards Manual is a flower shop inside a hotel. And even if it has the same name as the hotel, if it's distinctly a flower shop and has its own POS, there really isn't any reason to not use the flower shop MCC in that instance rather than the hotel MCC. So co-location with separate branding is a very important requirement. But the other piece so we give a number of pieces of guidance about that. Where the businesses aren't distinguishable, then and technically a merchant could qualify for multiple MCCs. Again, in the MCC guidance in the Merchant Data Standards Manual, we require that the MCC that attracts the most volume by dollar amount or by currency amount, not transaction count, but by currency amount, is the MCC that should be selected. So that the value of the transactions is more important to us than the volume of the transactions. And then the last piece of guidance which I can give is if one were to look at the Merchant Data Standards Manual and you actually go further inside and actually look at the columns, we have a column that gives the numeric, the 4-digit numeric. Then we have a column that describes the businesses that should fit into that MCC. It describes the business use of that MCC. And then the third column, we will list specific business types that should go in there. So if it is one of our generic MCCs, such as professional services, we may list in there that one of the professional services might be legal advice or accounting, and I think we may actually have separate MCCs for those. But physiotherapy training, for example, might be listed in there under medical treatments. And then the final column, so of the 4, is other MCCs that are very close to this MCC. So
I call that the sister column.
Yes, that's a great start calling it that. That's a great name. But yeah, that's the last piece of advice I give to people is that, look, if you're not sure if this is the MCC or not, look at those MCCs. If they seem just as viable, then go to them in the book and read their business description and read their list of sort of business types that qualify. And that will really help. The final piece of advice, if you're ultimately not sure, then ask. And people, there's a form on visa.com where you can ask a question to Visa. And if you describe the businesses, we will tell you which we think is the most appropriate based upon the information you've given us in that question.
So you mentioned before some potential for abuse based on the differences in the MCCs, but let's go back to that same example, one of my favorite restaurants, which is the bakery and restaurant in one tiny little hole in the wall, just one point of sale. I'd be shocked if they had more than one mid, because that's the nerdy sort of thing you think about when you're in payments. And you're like, you guys just have that one POS. There's only one mid here. Let's say that they picked restaurant, But over time, say maybe COVID times or something like that, it really became almost all bakery volume, not so much dine in or dine out restaurant. Is the MCC something that should be updated or re-examined from time to time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you want to run, an efficient acquiring business, then it definitely would behoove you to consistently or at least some sort of regular cadence review the MCCs out there for your merchants. You may be, if you leave them in one MCC that potentially may have suddenly grown into being considered more high risk, maybe the pricing change for that MCC, and you want to get them, and the MCC they should now be in is better for them, better approvals, better pricing, then it's almost like a duty to validate and make sure that they're still correct. We don't see, from a compliance point of view, we don't see many MCCs that have, where the merchant's business has migrated enough or evolved enough to require a new MCC. Our observation is generally when the merchant has an incorrect MCC is that they're assigned that from the start. So the best cure for making sure an MCC is valid is getting it right at the start when you're determining that MCC. And what we've seen in some examples, particularly through PayFacs, where a merchant will describe, as they're signing up to become a sponsored merchant, they will have a series of drop downs to select what type of business they're in. And it can be drop down after drop down as it filters through the various business types. And a few years ago, we saw an example of a PayFac who did that without, it wasn't an easy interface. And they didn't explain to the merchant what the benefit of doing that was. And as a result, they had a lot of merchants just accept, after a few clicks, just accept whatever MCC came up, because it got them out of the process. And they didn't realize that might actually have an impact on their pricing. It might have an impact on their approvals. So it definitely is important that an acquirer has a viable and easy MCC sort of assignment process. And that can even be down to the types and how many questions you ask your merchant to determine what business they should be in.
Okay. So I'm going to go a touch out of order because it tags off what you just said, but what happens if somebody gets it wrong? If he's just looking at transaction patterns and sees it's a dry cleaner, but the transaction amounts coming through are routinely in the four figures.
Yeah.
Unlikely to be a dry cleaner at that point. I'm sure that would get attention. But then we have my now tired example of the restaurant bakery where maybe it was more of a restaurant, but should be changed to bakery. Does it make a difference from a compliance perspective why a less than perfect MCC was applied? Are there some where you're like, you're pretty close, you're at least got the sister columns, and others where you're like, that's a big problem, we cannot have that?
Yeah. The process is the same. The way we raise a compliance case, we open a case, we send it to the acquirer and tell them that the MCC is wrong and why. And just so you're aware, some of these complaints come from issuers. In fact, a lot of them come from issuers because they're seeing them as they process transactions. They're seeing consumer complaints saying, I was expecting triple rewards on a hotel stay. And I went to a short-term property rental and it was categorized as 8713, which is long-term property rental, and they didn't get their triple rewards. So the cardholder called up, and they send us the issuer fixed it, and then sends us a complaint. But also we proactively search for these. So the example you gave, a couple of years ago, my team pulled a report of Canadian fast food businesses. And we filtered it by businesses with an average ticket value of 500 Canadian dollars or more. Every single merchant in that top 10 was not a fast food, the top 10, every single merchant was not a fast food restaurant. In fact, the number one merchant that was processing as a fast food restaurant in Canada was a window sales company. So they were literally selling double glazing and windows, and somehow they've been processing as fast food. We don't know why, but they had an average ticket value of about $3,000. So we will go. It's a lot of hamburgers. That's it. Yeah. So the actual process of engagement with clients is the same. We'll write out, we'll explain what the issue is, and we'll give them 30 days to fix it. Now, that's kind of the BAU compliance process. There is one caveat to that. If we find that the merchant should in fact be a high risk MCC, which means that, and it could be dealing with pornography, gambling, quasi cash, then our approach may be a bit more serious. And we may actually, rather than just approaching them and asking the acquirer to fix it, we may require some sort of risk review. We may give them a shorter time frame to fix it, and we may even assess fines from day one, knowing that the MCC is not only incorrect, but it's a serious violation of our rules and potentially a deliberate one, because at that point we start to wonder, has this been done really for approval rates? Because the approval rates are much
the
better.
process. Yeah, to
Yeah,
skip
yeah,
over
exactly.
diligence.
So yeah, if it's meant to be high risk, you'll see a much sterner approach and a shorter time frame and potentially more significant fines from Visa if it should have been a high risk MCC.
Well, so let's talk about that then. There are some sort of tricky MCC areas, and one that you and I touched on before is what is now infamous in my mind as the 5968. And for those who don't speak MCC, that is continuity and subscription. And this one, I think it makes some sense because, especially if you look at what the FTC has done and some other government regulators, there is a perception, at least at the government level, that there could be the potential for abuse here. Because people sign up for a subscription without meaning to, and they don't know why they're getting charged $80 a month. And so it makes some sense that there is an MCC that would be particular to that because you want to keep an eye on it. At the same time, there's probably an MCC for whatever good is being sold for that business, like if you're selling magazines or something like that, some physical good. And so then I look at that and think, well, how do you go about picking? Is it the method of sale or is it what I am selling? And then you have to worry about, if I pick what I'm selling, do I look like I'm trying to be shady and, skip out on the diligence that would be required for a subscription? And so I've gone round and round with myself about this. Do you have any words of wisdom regarding with the subscription?
It's a super valid question. We do have a bit of guidance at the start of the Merchant Data Standards Manual on this subject, and you're exactly right. In the instance of those MCCs, Visa has veered away from what is being sold to how it's being sold, and again, we've done that for very deliberate reasons, because of things like cancellation requirements, and then sort of potential oversight of those transactions. So Visa's opinion was it was easier to keep them in, whether they're selling magazines, as a one-off. If someone just goes onto a website and buys a magazine or a book, that's fine. But if they're using telesales or high-pressure sales or subscription sales to continually debit a cardholder and sell the same or new versions, but the same type of goods and services over and over again, we want to have visibility into that. And again, some of it ties back to dispute rights. Some of it ties back to transaction requirements. So in those instances, the transaction would also be required to be flagged as a recurring transaction, which opens up dispute rights for the issuer if the cardholder cancels the subscription and the merchant doesn't honor that. So, it's definitely a deliberate choice to say, we're less interested in what you sell. We're more interested in how you sell it because of the protections and oversight that the government wants to put in place over those transactions.
Okay. So in those cases, it sounds like if you are doing a subscription recurring billing model, in that case, it's how you sell that trumps for purposes of picking an MCC.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Well, that has been a long-standing question in my mind. And looking back, I hope I've gotten it right. All right. Well, I have to ask this one, and I'm sure you're probably already tired of talking about it, but let's talk firearms because it is Election Week in the United States. But it never ceases to amaze me that state legislatures who generally don't know what payments are, and I think mostly regarded as magic, right? Like you tap your card, you leave Target, no one arrests you. It's just magic that you managed to pay with that gesture. But they've legislated about MCCs. And I'm like, how many of you even really know what an MCC is? But still, we have some states that are saying there's now a new special MCC for firearm sales, and you absolutely must use it, and others that have expressly forbidden the use of this MCC. So give me a little bit on your thoughts on this. It blows my mind.
This is an interesting merchant category code. We traditionally, Visa has always allowed gun sales coming under sporting goods. That's traditionally where they're sold. We do have a specialty retail MCC that is for gun stores as well, and even just ammunition sales. However, there was a push to implement a dedicated MCC because the gun store MCC is actually generic. So there's about 50 different business types that go in there. So you couldn't guarantee it was just a gun store. So there was a push specifically for this MCC. I think the individuals that the driver behind pushing for it was a view that there would be visibility into what's being purchased, and we just simply don't carry SKU level data for these types of transactions in VisaNet. And then the opposing side, their view was that detailed transaction level data is not a good thing. And again, our view is it's not there either. It's not there for them. So one side's worried about something that isn't there. The other side's worried or thinks they're championing something that is there. Nonetheless, we agreed to implement it. And then the political action started around the US. So now we're at a point where 3 states, New York, Colorado, and California, have mandated the use of the MCC. And I think at last count, it's something like 17 plus states have put laws in place saying it cannot be used. So what Visa has done, and we've just released a new Visa Business News article today on this to account for New York, because that was a very recent decision. What Visa is doing, in our latest updated merchant data standards manual, where we talk about the types of businesses that you may use this in, we talk about it being a legal requirement in some states. And then we have a footnote on the other 2 MCCs saying, essentially, if it qualifies just as a gun store, you must use this other MCC. And then what Visa will be doing is blocking any transaction that uses the new MCC outside of those 3 states, New York, Colorado, and California, because of the laws that have been put in place in many of those states saying it must not be used. So the transaction will get rejected, and the acquirer will be required to resubmit the transaction with either the gun store MCC, the sporting goods store MCC, or the generic gun store MCC as appropriate.
I have to ask, in all the time you've been doing this, have you ever had to make MCC level auth decisions? Or is it just for this firearms one where, I have to tie it to state law and look at the MCC you're using and see if that MCC is legal in your state?
Gosh, that's a really good question. Because the one that immediately springs to mind is cannabis sales in Canada, where it is legal at a federal level, but obviously isn't legal here. But now I think about it, I don't think it's not a dedicated MCC for cannabis. So in my experience, and I've worked for Visa for over 23 years, it's the first time I can really recall. Oh, actually, no, there is one example. But we're not really making authorization decisions, but it is about gambling. So there's a lot of controls in place in the US about gambling, and many of which control where the cardholder is located rather than just where the merchant is located. So we keep a very close eye on the use of those MCCs, but we know a lot of the organizations that use those MCCs have very good controls in place, even to the point of geolocating the cardholder, so that if they're in a state that allows them to make an online gambling transaction, but then they happen to travel to a state where it's not permitted and try and make that transaction there, even though they're resident of another state where it is permitted, the merchant will actually block that transaction. So we haven't been doing any of that blocking, but we do keep a very close eye on it because, again, it's a bit of a legal, certainly a legal risk for Visa to be facilitating transactions that may not be in compliance with state and local law.
Well, I guess it's not surprising, gambling and guns they are very hot political
Yes.
topics. And it's not surprised that you have done some extra work on your side around those MCCs. Well, I think we are just right at the limit of our time. Melissa has rejoined us here. But Rob, thank you so much. I learned a lot, actually. I thought I had a pretty good handle on everything from our pre-work, but you managed to inform me on several new topics that I did not
Oh, well,
realize.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing session, both of you. Thank you. MCC are fascinating. I've always been just utterly charmed by the MCC ecosystem. There's 2 questions that came in about mixed use dual MCCs. We're at time. I'm going to pull them offline, circle back with both of you, grab your answer, and then get them back out to the question asker. Awesome questions, by the way, on the dual use MCC and goods. Again, appreciate your time, appreciate your wisdom on this. The complexities of MCCs are not going to end anytime soon. And bravo on making it somewhat simpler for people in the payments ecosystem with the blocking of the weapons MCC. I know that's causing everybody a lot of consternation of, oh gosh, what do we do? Because now the states are weighing in something, frankly, they shouldn't be in. But I digress. Both of you have an awesome, awesome time. Next up, we have some awesome threat intelligence hunters with Aid Sheik, Frank McKenna, and Marianne Miller. So please stay with us. Jump to the new link. You guys, please feel free if you can make it, stay with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.